Hello and welcome to today's Wyoming Community Navigator Program webinar. We are so glad that you have joined us for today's presentation. My name is Mandy Bailey and I'm the Advising and Education Director for the Wyoming Community Navigator Program. I'm going to be working behind the scenes today to assist as best I can with any technical difficulties that may arise. You may want to monitor the chat as well because we'll be posting helpful links and information. And this webinar is being recorded and you should be able to access it about a day after completion. So also make sure you monitor the chat, chime in, unmute yourself to ask questions, however you are comfortable. So the Wyoming Community Navigator Program is a pilot program funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration. And it utilizes the Wyoming Entrepreneurial Support Network to reduce barriers that all small businesses often face, including those owned by groups such as veterans, women, and those from rural communities and communities of color. The Wyoming Community Navigator Program uses a hub and spoke model to pursue its goals. Through the collective efforts, the hub and spoke provide training, mentorship, access to capital, and access to other resources to help small business owners build resiliency and ultimately be the driving force behind Wyoming's economic recovery. Today's presentation is Networking 101 for Small Businesses with Bridget Manley and Daniel Patterson. And we are so thankful to have them back with us. Bridget is an e-learning specialist with a passion for helping learners become effective agents in their careers and in their communities. She co-founded Ascendant Design and Training with her husband, Daniel Patterson, in July of 2020. Before that, she was the curriculum manager for a Denver-based startup company where she developed compliance and manufacturing training for the state legal cannabis industry. And Daniel is a software systems developer with over 30 years of multidisciplinary experience in software, electronic, and mechanical design. He's been involved in several different industries, including logistics, gaming, music, and heavy equipment, just to name a few. And in those industries, Daniel has managed projects large and small and has overseen research, development, engineering, and IT departments, and has managed the implementation and upkeep of automated production systems. So without further ado, we will get to our presentation, and here is Bridget and Daniel.
Well, thank you, Mandy. We appreciate that wonderful introduction as always. And we're happy to be here with you today to talk about Networking 101 for small businesses. I know that networking isn't always everybody's idea of a fun time, but we're going to give you some tips and strategies you can use today to make it more effective, enjoyable, and something that you actually want to do. So we'll let, there's our slide deck. Next slide, please. So we're going to just jump right in today with a discussion question. We always like these sessions to be interactive, so you're talking with us and you're, conversing with other people in the group. Just to kind of break the ice, we'd like you to just tell us a little bit about yourself. Feel free to drop in the chat what type of business you own or hope to own if you don't own one already. And if you're comfortable with this, just tell us a little bit about what brings you here today. What would you like to learn about networking? Feel free to drop in any questions you might have, anything like that. And then we'll use that information to try to tailor this to meet those needs. So again, just drop into the chat what type of business you own and what brings you here today. And as you're thinking about that and writing those responses, we'll just go ahead and tell you a little bit more about us and what you'll learn today. And then we'll come back to this question in just a moment. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about us. We are a husband and wife team. We're a small but mighty team of two. We founded our business in August of 2020. I'm the Chief Learning Officer, and like a lot of business owners, I wear many hats. So a lot of what I do is working with our clients, which are mostly businesses, analyzing their learning needs so we can develop training materials that help people do their jobs better. I'm kind of the head of the services department, and Daniel, he's the head of our products department. He's our chief technical officer, and he's developing tools and different resources for instructional designers to help people like me do our jobs more effectively. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what you'll do and what you'll learn today. In this interactive webinar, you'll learn how networking can help you grow your business and your skills as a business owner. You'll also explore some of the differences between virtual and in-person networking, and then we'll, compare and contrast the two so you can decide which one is best for you in any given situation. We'll also explore some strategies for effective networking, both in general as well as virtual and in person. So throughout this session, please feel free to share your ideas and your thoughts. Feel free to drop those into the chat as we go. We'll pause throughout to stop and respond, answer questions, highlight really good ideas. So feel free to use the chat. Or if you're comfortable, when we hit kind of pauses in this webinar today, feel free to unmute your microphone and just share an idea or ask a question. We just ask that when you're not speaking to just put your microphone on mute, just so we don't have any background noise. So with that, I'm going to jump to the chat and see what we have so far. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Jyoti, perhaps? Seismic Science LLC, Sonic Imaging Technologies with applications in energy and medical imaging sectors. Wow, that sounds really cool. I've never heard that before. That sounds so super technical. That's awesome. Tina is, I am an ADA and accessibility coordinator for Wyoming Independent Living, a nonprofit organization. That is so cool. That's so cool. I'm just learning about accessible design for e-learning. So not an expert by any means, but I definitely appreciate that work and how much it really makes things accessible to people with disabilities. So awesome. Courtney, I am the business liaison librarian at Unbound Library. I'm here to gain ideas on how to help local small businesses or those wanting to start their own business. Hey, cool, awesome. I used to be a librarian, so librarians are very near and dear to my heart. Welcome. Kristen, financial advisor with Equitable Advisors. I focus on where my clients are, what they have, and where they want to go, and develop a strategy to get them there. Nice, that's really cool. That's awesome. Kamisha, I have a small arts boutique in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am also an outreach coordinator for Public Lands Interpretive Association, a nonprofit in Albuquerque. Cool. Well, welcome from Albuquerque. That's so great. Thank you for sharing today. Again, feel free to drop into the chat and add questions and thoughts as we go. So hopefully you'll find this useful today. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to do another question, and this one's just really fast. Go ahead and drop in the chat. What comes to your mind when you hear the word networking? Just first thing that comes to your mind, go ahead and drop that in the chat real quick, please. Meeting new folks, okay. Contacts? Okay. Anything else? First thing that comes to your mind? I have a book of, it's called F in Exams, and it's all the funny and wrong answers to questions for high school exams. And one of the questions is, what is networking? And the student responded, networking is talking to people you don't like so you can get a job. Not exactly what we're talking about, but that is one answer I suppose you could put in. Tina says, connecting with others. Kamisha, no, that's fine. If you're shy, feel free to engage in whatever level feels comfortable to you. None of the questions today are obligatory, excuse me. So just feel free to engage in whatever level is comfortable for you. Okay, cool. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing those thoughts today. Yeah, contacts, meeting new people, connecting. Yeah, that's all about networking for sure. Next slide, please. So we're going to start just so we're all on the same page, defining what networking means. I think in this context, especially for businesses, you can say networking is intentionally building mutually beneficial relationships in a business setting. And the key word here is mutually beneficial. I know that for a lot of people, networking can feel uncomfortable because sometimes it feels like self-promotion or it feels scammy. But real networking is making sure that you're adding value to someone else, even as you're seeking to gain value yourself. So that's kind of the core. It's always mutually beneficial. You can use networking for a wide range of applications in your business, including generating leads, finding potential clients or customers. You can also use it to find potential vendors, employees, or collaborators. So finding people whose services you could use and pay for. It's also a great way for building your own support network. And I don't know if this is always something that comes to mind when we think of networking, but it's really one of the main advantages. Just having a group of people around you who are other business owners who are having the same struggles and challenges that you are, that you can learn from and grow with. I know that for myself, my own professional network of other freelance instructional designers has been one of the main resources I've used to grow my business and just become better at what I do. And finally, you can use networking to either find a mentor or provide mentorship to someone else. So you can kind of either get or give that more intensive help and attention from somebody who's very skilled. Next slide, please. I think for me, one of the biggest advantages of networking, though, is that it's an alternative to the hard sell approach. So on the screen, I have a meme. It's Dwight Schrute from The Office on his cell phone. And the text says, "Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my sales pitch. So buy it, maybe." This is how hard sales feel to me, at least. It feels like a really bad pickup line. And it's just not something I'm necessarily very good at. Now, to be fair, it's important to know how to hard sell, how to make a sales pitch. So I'm not saying you should replace networking with that, but networking is another strategy you can use to generate that business. So when you think about it, networking is kind of a key component of your marketing strategy. It's a way that you get your business and, especially your personal brand, if you're a freelancer or a sole proprietor, it's a way to get that out in front of other people so they know who you are, what you do, who you do it for, and the value that you add. You can even think of networking as a kind of like a relational version of content marketing. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it's basically that instead of trying to generate ads that push people to buy your product or service, you go out and you provide things like blogs or videos that educate people on a subject or help them solve a problem. And then at the end, you have a little tag that says, "Hey, I do this as a living. If you need help, call me." That kind of a thing. It's a little bit more gentle way of generating leads, and it's all about providing value to your clients or customers first before asking them for something. And networking is kind of the same way. You're seeking to meet people, to be helpful, to help them succeed, and in that particular context, they're more likely to give back to you as well. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, just the importance of making sure that it is mutually beneficial. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the chat here real quick. Kamisha from earlier clarified that her comment was that when she thinks of networking, she thinks of "I'm shy," laugh out loud. Totally. I get that. Okay. Obi says, just like kind of an introduction. Ipanek, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that correctly or incorrectly. We offer modern threat prevention solutions and ransomware protection to help businesses increase their overall security posture, building relationships. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Kamisha says, "I love the thought as a bad pickup line. I've always felt that way." Yeah, right. Some people have that skill and some people it's really hard. So, okay. Tina says, "Can we have a copy of the PowerPoint or notes from this presentation afterwards?" Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, we can send a copy of the PowerPoint afterwards and see that gets to you. So thank you for asking. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about virtual networking and in-person networking, starting with the virtual side. So to kind of put this in context, we'll talk about exactly where these types of networking activities take place, and then we'll compare and contrast them. But to start with virtual networking, one of the main places where this typically happens is on social media. That's kind of what social media is designed to do, to build those personal networks. You're probably familiar with LinkedIn. That's kind of the main professional social media site. I'm on there quite a bit. I've made a lot of really valuable connections there. But depending on what you do and what your service or product is, you might get value from other platforms too, such as maybe Twitter, sometimes Facebook or Instagram. Another one you might consider is called Quora. Quora, I believe it is. It's a really interesting platform where people just come and they ask questions about everything you can think of. And I've noticed that more recently, there have been people asking more business related questions. Like for my industry, there are people who sometimes ask, what makes a good e-learning course? Or how do people learn most effectively in a business setting? And that's a really great way to jump in and actually start providing some of that value, making connections with people, and giving them some advice and some guidance that will help them solve their problem. So that could be something else you could look at as well. Another way you can network virtually is by attending virtual events. Now, with the pandemic, as we all know, there's been a lot more virtual conferences, virtual webinars like this one, just different ways to connect with people in a virtual group setting. And those are great ways to build connections too, because you might be meeting people who you wouldn't normally run into in person. Another strategy is to join professional groups online. This is where you usually say like a group of people organized around a single industry, a single problem, or maybe a sub-problem or subset of that industry. For instance, on LinkedIn, I'm part of a group that talks about how to make accessible e-learning design. Daniel on LinkedIn also moderates a group on how to use Inkscape, which is an open source program that's kind of an alternative to Adobe Illustrator. So there are many ways you can find groups online that maybe have clients that you want to reach out to, or maybe have collaborators and colleagues that you want to connect with as well. And finally, if you meet somebody through your virtual networking that you really want to know more about, that you really want to connect with them on a deeper level, you can always set up a virtual coffee chat. And this is where you and someone else, or maybe a small group of people, jump on to say like a Zoom call or a Google Meet, and you just meet virtually for half an hour or so and just talk about, business, what's going on, like how can I help you? How can I support you? That's a really good way to kind of build more deeper relationships with people in your network. Next slide, please. So in-person networking, by contrast, usually happens, of course, at a physical location. One of the main places that in-person networking happens is typically at conferences, seminars, or lectures. Again, those group events. Another thing you can look at as well is after-hours events. A lot of times, chambers of commerce will host these, where you can connect with other people in the business community, share ideas, get support. Service organizations can be a great way to network as well. This can include, for example, like the Rotary Club, the Lions Club, some of these different local groups that you're kind of building a network around a shared idea, a shared goal. And especially if networking is kind of maybe scary for you, or if it's not something you feel comfortable with, this is a really good way to ease into it, because you don't have to stand there and basically sustain the whole conversation yourself. A lot of the topics of conversation will be dictated by whatever project you're on or committee you're on. So that's a really good way to build connections as well. Of course, there are professional groups, just like online. There are in-person professional groups you can join as well. And finally, you can always rely on the in-person coffee chat as well. So again, if you know somebody who you want to connect with on a deeper level, take them out to coffee. It's a really great way to learn more about them and kind of deepen that relationship more. Okay, I'm just going to check the chat to see if we have. Okay, Tina says, I did a little outreach this morning and it felt very awkward. I have not done any in some time. Yeah, no, I think a lot of us are there. I know that after the pandemic, some of my in-person skills have atrophied quite a bit, so I'm sure you're not alone. She says, with online platforms, I'm always concerned about the line between personal info and business info. Yeah, that's a very good point. I'll try to circle back to that question, or that, to that observation when we get to the point about tips for virtual networking. But that is a very good thing to keep in mind, is that you do want to maintain a level of separation, especially with people maybe you don't know very well at first. So thank you. Next slide, please. So now that we've looked at these two types of networking, let's just take a moment to compare and contrast them. Virtual networking, probably one of the biggest advantages is that it's not limited to one geographic area, which means that you can connect with people from, basically, across the country and even around the world. It's often asynchronous, meaning you don't have to be at the same place at the same time. So that makes it more convenient to talk to people, like especially if you're having, say, like a conversation on LinkedIn, or maybe you're on Slack and you're, talking with a colleague there. Basically, you can just jump in and chime on whenever it's convenient for you. The flip side of that is that sometimes it can be a distraction too. Or if you're managing conversations across a variety of platforms, you've got one on LinkedIn, one in Slack, it can easily become a little overwhelming to maintain all of those. Another downside potentially is that virtual networking doesn't carry the same sense of immediacy that in-person networking does. I know that I was just at a networking event, or we were both at a networking event recently. And one of the people we met said, look, the biggest way to, get business in this community is simply to meet people in person. That's how people kind of connect here. And of course, when you're networking virtually, you don't really get that same sense of immediacy. And finally, virtual networking does take a level of tech savviness, especially if you're using, video conferencing and those kinds of things. It will take, a slight learning curve to know how to use those proficiently. So in contrast, in-person networking is, of course, typically limited to one geographical area. So you're limited to the connections and people within your immediate community. Now, of course, the exception to this would be conferences, which are in most cases designed to be solely a networking event, and those can be very valuable. But of course, in-person conferences do require travel, which of course takes an expense in both time and money. On the flip side, though, in-person networking does demonstrate a greater level of commitment and intentionality. When you show up to an in-person networking event, you've made the commitment to be there in that space fully present, and that says a lot for what you value. And it also doesn't require many tech skills. Like you can basically come with a stack of business cards and you're set to go. So those are some of the, kind of comparison and contrast between those two modes. Now, I think one of the questions people often have is, which one should I be using? Should I be or should I be networking just online, or should I be networking just in person? Next slide, please. And I think the answer we would have to that is that you should do both. Virtual and in-person networking both require distinct skills, but they also overlap and reinforce each other very well. So there's a big potential for using your networks, your virtual networks, to reinforce your in-person connections and vice versa. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment and how you can do that. But another advantage of kind of that hybrid approach is that it makes sure that your networking skills aren't too heavily weighted in one side or the other. Because again, they are distinct skills. And if you're too involved in one, you may not be as proficient in the other. So it's important to practice both on a regular basis. And again, this is a hybrid approach, meaning that it takes both the virtual and the in-person together. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some general tips that you can use for networking. And this applies to whether you're doing it in person or online. Either way, these are just some general tips that will make you more effective overall. And I think the first one, the most important one, is to focus on giving first and not just receiving. I found that in my own networking interactions, I have found, form the best relationships simply by showing up and trying to see how I can be useful. Now, this can be a difficult mindset to get in, especially if you do have an immediate need. Especially if you're starting your own business and you're just brand new and you need those clients, you need those connections. It can be very difficult to kind of forestall that need and instead focus on helping somebody else. But that's really where networking really works, is that you're showing that you're concerned about the other person and their success. And when you come with that particular energy, people are more likely to reciprocate and help you as well. So again, like the big thing is just to simply show up and to be intent on adding value wherever you're at in whatever way you can. The second general tip would be to just make it easy for people to reach you. As you can see on my screen here, I have a QR code that you can scan. If you scan that, it'll actually open up my business card. I haven't used it yet, so you guys can be my guinea pigs and tell me if it works. But basically, this is an easy way to get connected and to have it easy for people to find you and connect with you as well. Some other things you can try is if you have business cards and if you have a LinkedIn profile, make sure to include the name of your LinkedIn profile on your business card. Same thing with any other social media you might be on, such as Instagram or Twitter, basically where people can find you. Make that easy for them to find you. It's also a good idea when you meet someone to ask them how they prefer to communicate with you. Some people prefer social media, other people prefer text messages or calls or emails. Just get on the same page with them and see how they prefer to communicate. So that way you're communicating with them in a way that's comfortable for them. The next two pieces of advice are about using those two models, in person and virtually, to reinforce each other. So look for ways to use online interactions to nurture your in-person connections. And here's an example. Let's say you go to a networking event and you meet, say like a potential client or a potential collaborator, and you really want to get to know them better. A good way to do that is to, after the event, find them on LinkedIn and then send them a connection request. And if you're not familiar with LinkedIn, a connection request is basically an invitation to include them in your network. And it's always a good idea to include a personal note with those connection requests, usually with like where you met, maybe what you talked about, and just kind of a nice follow-up line. So one that I typically use is, for example, like, "Hi, Bob, it was nice meeting you at the chamber after hours. I enjoyed talking about the local community. I look forward to connecting with you here on LinkedIn." Just a short message, but that personalization really does increase the chances that someone will actually accept that request. Now, on the flip side, you can bring your online connections into the offline world as well. And you should do that too whenever possible. So here's an example of that as well. Let's say you have somebody in your network that you talk a lot with, either on Twitter or maybe on LinkedIn, and you really jive really well. Take them out to coffee. If they live in your local area, see if, ask them what's their favorite restaurant or their favorite coffee shop, and just take them out for a bit and just get to know them better. So again, as you can see, virtual and in-person networking aren't mutually exclusive. They actually work really well to reinforce each other. Another kind of general tip for you is to make sure that you have your elevator pitch really fine-tuned. So that way, when somebody asks you, "What do?" You have a very simple but powerful 1 to 2 sentence statement about what you do, who you do it for, and how you add value. And then finally, anytime you're networking, it's always a good idea when you're wrapping up the conversation to ask the other person, "What can I do to support you?" Again, this comes down to giving value. Instead of seeking to add value to yourself right away, ask what you can do to help that person and support them. And that usually opens up the opportunity for them to reciprocate and ask how they can help you as well. So as you can see, again, it comes back to that idea of networking being mutually beneficial. I'm just going to check the chat and see. Okay, thank you, Kamisha. You said it totally works. Thank you. The QR code, thank you. I like to use QR codes for my artists in the gallery. Yeah, they're a really easy way to just, make it easy for people to find information about you, or in this case, about your artists. Yeah, excellent. And I'm just going to drop into the chat. I'm going to drop in the the name of the app that I used to create this. Okay, it's called Blink, B-L-I-N-Q. They do have a free version. So if you just want to try it out, you can sign up for free and you can create up to 2 business cards, and I'm not sure exactly how many backgrounds, but you can set up several backgrounds too. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about some tips for virtual networking. Um, Virtual networking can be kind of a different experience than in-person networking. So if you're not familiar with how to build connections online, here are some basic strategies you can use to do that. The first is to simply look to contribute positively to conversations that are meaningful to you. I know that when people join LinkedIn, a lot of people say, I don't know what to post. I don't know what to make on this thing. What should I do? I think the best way to get involved is to find other people's posts and find things that are interesting, things that are interesting to you, things you'd like to maybe add more context or more perspective on, and comment on other people's content first. Because that means you don't have to think of all your own ideas, but you're still adding value and you're reinforcing somebody else. Basically when you comment on somebody's posts and say, yeah, I totally agree, and here's some more information, you're validating their point of view. And that can be a really powerful way to build connection. The second one is to simply just be mindful of your digital presence. Make sure that how you're contributing online to virtual conversations correctly represents who you want to be known as in person. So that way you don't have a different digital persona from your in-person persona. And this is especially important when conversations might get a little bit heated, as they do online, right? It's easy to often get sucked up into the energy of that conversation and sometimes feel a little bit more forceful or a little bit more opinionated than maybe is needed. So when that happens, it's always a good idea just to step back, take a breath, reassess, and choose how you want to engage in that conversation in a way that represents you and your values correctly. Another good tip is kind of more practical. It's simply just reread any message before you send it on any platform, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, email, text message, whatever it is, simply because a lot of context and meaning can get lost in virtual conversation. Right? Like you can't see someone's facial expression, you can't hear their tone of voice. So maybe if you write something that you mean to be just a little tongue in cheek, it might come off very different to somebody on the receiving end. So just make sure you always make sure that you reread those messages. Just think of ways that it could be interpreted differently. And when needed, sometimes it helps to just put like a little emoji in there, like a smile emoji or something, just to indicate what your intent actually is. Another strategy is to use the direct messaging feature in an online platform to reach out to people who you want to build a deeper relationship with. And this is really helpful, especially if you're in, say, like LinkedIn, or maybe you're part of a professional group, and there's one or two people who you really resonate with and you want to learn more from, or you want to see if you can add value to their business. Don't be afraid to use a direct message or DM. To send them a message and invite them to connect on a deeper level. Start a conversation there, say, hey, I really liked your idea today and professional group. I'd like to talk to you more about that. Can we set up a coffee time to just, talk and chat? That's a really great way to connect with people on a more direct level. And finally, it's always a good idea when appropriate to offer to make introductions to other people in your network. This is a very common thing on LinkedIn, and sometimes it can be really helpful if you have a large network and you find somebody who's maybe new to the industry or is pivoting and starting a new career. You might know somebody in your network who could help that person. If that's the case, feel free to reach out to them and see if you can make that connection and add value. Again, that's another way of being useful and adding value to the people you're connecting with. Okay. Just going to the chat. Courtney says, my predecessor gave me the tip to not take people too serious. We are all human, all put on pants in the morning. It was helpful for me. Yes, that's a very good observation. Yeah. And I think to kind of build onto that, I think one thing that helps when you're online is to always, whenever you can, always assume positive intent. Again, when you don't see somebody, you don't see someone face to face, it's sometimes easy to assume that, maybe they're, antagonizing you or whatever. But it's always better to just assume whenever possible that they mean well and that maybe the message just, maybe the message just didn't come across the way they intended, or maybe they're having a bad day, or, whatever the case may be. But yes, I think that's very good advice. Just remember that don't take people too seriously. We're all human. We're all figuring it out. Excellent. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so next we're going to look at some tips for in-person networking. The first one is pretty basic. Always bring your business cards. It can be a stack of business cards. It can be your digital business card, just a way that people can know how to connect with you, remember who you are. If you're handing out, say, like an in-person business card or a physical one, it might not be a bad idea to write on the back where we met and what we talked about. So that way, when somebody goes to that stack of business cards they get after a meeting, you'll stand out. They're like, oh yeah, I had that conversation with Bill about, this particular topic. Another good tip is to find small ways to start a conversation. I know that networking with people who you don't know can be kind of intimidating. You don't know what to say or how to start a conversation. Just find one or two things. Maybe it could be something as simple as a lapel pin. Oh, that's really cool. What does that mean? Or it can be something about their business, like, hey, I saw you have a new business on Main Street. Tell me how that's going. Just find small ways to kind of, introduce yourself and get the conversation flowing. Another good strategy is once you've got the conversation rolling, ask insightful questions that invite people to talk about their business and their experience. I think for me, one of my favorite questions to ask people is, tell me how you got into this business. How did your business start? And I've always found that, there's always a really interesting story behind that. And that's a great way to get to know somebody better and get them talking about their personal journey. And then again, like that, that kind of opens up the door for them to reciprocate and ask about you. The final tip for in-person networking is to just be situationally aware. Just kind of watch for subtle cues when somebody maybe wants to enter the conversation or has something else that they have to attend to. At the last in-person networking event that we were at, I got a really good piece of advice from one of my connections that I met there. Was when you're standing in a group talking with people, step back a little bit and leave space for someone else to enter the conversation. Because sometimes when people are kind of like in a small group, just all facing each other, somebody on the outside might be like, "Ooh, I don't really feel comfortable diving into that," or "I don't really feel like there's room for me to, join that conversation." So just always leave space around you so someone else can come into the circle and add their ideas as well. Okay, I'm just going to check. Okay, yeah. Let me just kind of refine that earlier from the link to that website. It's actually blink.me. Should be able to find it there. And again, that's this website where you can create digital business cards. There are other apps as well. There's lots of different ways you can create business cards. So it's a good idea to kind of just investigate a little bit and see which platform works for you. But that's definitely a great resource to take to in-person networking events. Next slide, please. So that's basically everything that we had for you today, but we also realize that you probably have questions as well. We're going to go ahead and open it up to that. We'll both be here. So Daniel, if there's a question that you think that you might be able to answer, feel free to jump in. Yeah, we'll just open it up. What questions or other thoughts do you have? Okay, I see Tina wrote in the chat, this is also incredibly helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Okay, Kristen Lee asks, how do you find networking events? That's a very good question. Two websites that you can use. One is called Eventbrite. That's EVENTBRITE. I'll put that in the chat. That's a website where you can find virtual events. They have a lot of events for professional groups and industries. That's a good way to find virtual groups. And then for in-person groups, you can try Meetup. That's another platform. Again, same kind of thing. That's where you find, networking events, but they're usually in person in your area. And you can actually search for events in your area within a certain distance from where you're at. Very easy to find, and yeah, lots of cool stuff on there. Yeah, so great question.
I just also wanted to add that Eventbrite has a number of in-person events as well. almost all of them will be basically like premium level. Almost all of them are usually pay events, like conferences where you have to pay to get in and stuff, or classes. But yeah, it goes virtual and physical there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. That's good to know. So you can find both virtual and physical on Eventbrite for sure. Okay. If anybody else knows of any good places to find networking events, feel free to drop those into the chat. That'd be great. Let's see. Courtney and Kamisha kind of have the same question. Icebreakers when joining in on conversations. That's a good one. Again, like if I'm talking to other business owners, I'll ask them, how did you start your business? Or sometimes if there's a round of introduction where everybody kind of introduces a little bit about themselves, I'll try to think of one or two things that I want to ask them more about, what they do or who they do it for. Yeah, that's a really good question. That's usually what I go to. Does anybody else have any thoughts on icebreakers for networking?
I have found, Bridget, when I'm networking, the more questions I can ask an individual, the better, because as we all know, people kind of like to talk about themselves a little bit, and that allows for an opportunity to maybe open up into different conversation as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's a very good strategy. Is asking questions about themselves to kind of open them up. And yeah, exactly. Yeah. Encourage them to talk about themselves. So you might ask like how long they've been in business, what kind of business they offer, who's their biggest client. You might also ask, what's the biggest win you've had this week, this month, this year? Ask them to talk about the highs of their business, the things that they, like things that have gone well. Yes, Tina.
Yeah, so I'm doing something a little bit new with our program. So it's a new position. So what I'm working on is being able to help businesses with information on accessibility and basically things that could help them, to possibly get more business from, people that have disabilities and that kind of a thing. However, so we did make up some flyers and things like that, but I kind of feel nervous about just showing up somewhere to talk to. I don't know. I'm just kind of, since the pandemic, a little out of sync with doing the in-person stuff. So I don't know, just any ideas for that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Something you might ask, like when you meet somebody, is just ask them like, do you know, how many of your people or like, how many of your clients or customers might have disabilities? I can definitely help with that. And I think a lot of it too is just, getting them to talk about their business and themselves. That'll give you some cues and some questions you can ask as a follow-up. So for instance, like, you might find somebody who's like maybe a web developer and like, oh, that's really interesting, and then talk about your business and what you do and maybe, offer some resources or some just, some suggestions on how they can make websites more accessible, especially for people like with disabilities. So I think to kind of sum that up, I would say start by getting them to talk about themselves first, and then see where there might be, some places for you to, offer some, offer some resources, offer some advice, ask some further questions, and demonstrate your level of expertise and how you might be able to help them. Does that help?
It does help. Thank you. I don't want to come across as a person coming in with a suitcase trying to sell something necessarily, because it truly is to be helpful to people. So that is actually really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think on the other side of that, talking about yourself and what you do, you can talk about like, what got you into this business? Why are you passionate about accessibility? Because you probably have a really interesting story, that explains why. And that's what people gravitate towards. People gravitate towards stories about people. So if you tell your story and kind of like, why you're interested in it and how you got into it, that's going to make you stick out more in their minds. So that way later down the road, if they have a need that you can fill, you're going to be probably top of mind.
Okay, thank you. That actually helps a lot. And I think kind of takes the pressure off as well. Thank you.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Like a lot of networking is like low pressure. You're not there to sell anything today. If somebody comes out and says, hey, I've got a project for you, cool. But usually that's not going to happen. You're just building relationships, learning about other people, and you're just enjoying, the conversation. Great question. Yeah, Kelly.
So I have a question. You talked about when you're in one of those tight knit groups to step back. What if you'd like to speak to someone who's in one of those tight knit groups and there isn't an opening? How do you go up and touch somebody and say, hey, and what do you do to get their attention? I don't know.
That's a good question. As a former reporter who probably did it really ham-fistedly and probably annoyed a lot of people, I would say probably, if you can, wait until they're disengaged from that conversation. And like when they break away, try to approach them. Because sometimes trying to kind of nudge your way into a conversation in progress can be a little bit awkward or can feel a little bit forced. I would say, if you have the time, just maybe, stay in the area, but just kind of keep an eye on where they're at and see if you can catch them after the conversation. If you don't have the time, then yeah, like maybe a quick shoulder tap and say, hey, not to interrupt, but I really like your idea. Here's your business card, or here's my business card. When you're done here, let's chat. That could be another way to do it. Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Okay. Let's go into the chat. Okay. Let's see. Tina asks, if it is a cold call outreach, is phone better than dropping it in person? I don't know. I really don't have a whole lot of experience cold calling. But again, like I used to be a reporter and a lot of my job was getting people to talk to me when maybe that wasn't high on their list. I did find that dropping it in person did have a lot better effects than calling, because people can kind of, ignore a call, but when you're there in person, it's harder to be ignored, I guess. Dan, did you have any thoughts on that?
If I can find my unmute button. No, I agree with that. If you can find a way to make it there physically, a lot of times you'll just pop in at some moment when the person has no choice but to speak with you for a few minutes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Dan has a lot more experience with that kind of side of, business development than I do. So thank you for that, Dan. Okay. Kamisha says, I know this may sound strange, but I always feel weird when I am walking around, like I'm creeping about, eavesdropping. I know that's part of it, but how do you get rid of that creeper feeling? Yeah, no, that's a legitimate thing. That's a really good thing. I mean, I think a lot of it is just, knowing that you're there to, be valuable, that you're there to see if you can help somebody. That kind of helps you feel, I think, at least for me, helps you feel a little bit like, a little bit less like a creeper and more like you're there to just add value. And to be honest, everybody else is doing the same thing. Everybody else is looking to make connections and looking to see if they can meet with people. So you're not alone. It's just kind of part of that whole experience. And I think, frankly, it's one of those things that probably gets easier with practice. So if you feel awkward about it, that's okay. Kind of push through that awkwardness and just keep doing it, and it'll start feeling more natural. Let's see. Kristen says, look at Tom Sinek's why video. Yeah, totally. Folks will relate to you on your why and getting to know you too. Yeah, that's a really, really good resource. He talks about, your why as being the motivating reason why you're doing a certain thing and how that really resonates with people and builds connection. So yeah, thank you for adding that. Okay. She also says, I've joined a center sphere group too, to help meet folks. That's really interesting. Can you tell me more about Center Sphere? I've never heard about that before. And you can drop that in the chat or unmute.
Yeah, Center Sphere, it's like a BNI group, so it's all a networking group. The folks in my group, for the most part, are smaller businesses looking to get up and off the ground and kind of get some success out of it.
Cool. And is that online, in person?
This one is in person, but they do host some online virtual networking events as well.
Okay, cool. That sounds like a really good resource. Yeah, where you can just meet other business owners and start building that network. That's great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, any other thoughts? Daniel, is there anything else you'd like to add or anything that I might have forgotten today?
No, not here. I'm ready to look up that Center Sphere group, though.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I'm going to check that out too. Okay, I apologize if I mispronounce this, but Obilbeto, perhaps, says, I like the Blink Me app. It's lit. It's true. It is lit. I love it. It's great. I used it for the first time at a networking event last week and it worked really well. People just scanned the QR code and it was super to use. Obi is fine. Okay, thank you, Obi. I appreciate that. Okay, any other thoughts or questions or resources you'd like to share? Kamisha says Alignable is a great app, web space for networking. Yeah, definitely. I haven't been on there very much, but that's a good resource too.
All right. Well, I think that concludes our webinar for today. I'd like to thank both Bridget and Daniel for this valuable and insightful information. And the thing that I really love about this is that this transcends the multi-generational workforce that we have. So it really is speaking to all of the generations that we have in our workforce and how to reach and network everyone. So thank you for that. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so at the conclusion of this, we do send out a short survey. Please make sure you complete that because that really helps us to design our trainings for things that are valuable to you. And additionally, please check out the WyomingCommunityNavigator.org, our website. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of the ways to connect with one another because we do have some exciting trainings coming up in November as well. And you can find that on our website under our events. And so thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Bridget and Daniel, and I hope everyone has a great day.